glutes and hamstring focused leg workout today. Again, I'm starting with calves. I've already done 3 working sets. I'm gonna do 1 more, but just to reiterate what I've told in the past is that I like starting with my calves. I have way more energy in the beginning of my workout, so I'm able to generate a lot more force and actually be more patient with each set. I'm not just trying to aimlessly rush through it as if I were to do it at the end where I'm tired. But then also it does kind of warm up my ankles and offer me a little bit more mobility. So when I get into my other movements, like my presses and stuff. But again, I'm not too focused on the mobility for the ankle, but I do like doing these in the beginning for that reason. If I'm trying to focus on my quads and I'm trying to bring my knee as far over my toe without my heel elevating off the ground. But today, focused on hamstrings and glutes. 1 more set here. One thing I'm thinking about is really driving that ankle joint forward, not just thinking about going up. So I'm actually thinking about pushing that ankle joint forward in the movement. As you can see, I'm pushing that ankle joint forward, but then also keeping my ankles in together so I'm not coming out onto my toes like this. Really trying to drive that ball underneath my big toe into the platform the entire time. So we'll do 1 more set. And then lastly, I like going to close to failure on these. I think that has worked well with me. I don't have the biggest calves in the world, as you may see, but going to failure and then including some form of lengthened partial reps, just trying to do as many lengthened partials towards the end of the set, I find really does help. Last tip too, actually, that I can give is when you're coming down, don't just fall down into the movement. So don't just bounce down, really control that eccentric, but actively stretch your calf by pulling your toe. So I'm actively pulling my toe up towards my shin. I'm not just passively letting the weight push me down into this position. I'm actively trying to pull myself down, keep my leg straight, or my knee straight, sorry, to stretch as much as I can in that calf. All right, we're gonna move on to some hamstrings now, and I'll explain a little bit why I'm doing hamstrings first. Why I'm doing hamstrings first is similar to why I start with calves, is that I have more energy in the movement. This isn't really going to be that systemically fatiguing. So I'm able to generate a lot more force and try to apply as much tension and force on the actual hamstrings. If I save them towards the end, there's nothing wrong with that. You can do them at the end. But again, I'm just going to be tired. And like I said, this isn't really going to be that exhausting or fatiguing for my actual pressing movements. Whereas obviously if I'm starting with some sort of leg extension for quads and then I go and do squats or something, I might pre-exhaust, I hate using that term, but pre-exhaust my quads, and then I might not be able to, not necessarily go heavy because that's not my goal, but to generate as much force as I can or control. But again, there's no right or wrong. You can start with whatever. Just have a plan and an idea of why you're starting with it as opposed to just arbitrarily doing it. So that's kind of why I like to do it hamstrings first, so I can have as much focus on them as possible. A few things I'm thinking about is keeping my knees straight and pointed straight the entire time. I don't want them kicked out like this because, again, this is a hinge joint. It only moves in one direction. So I want to make sure that I'm lined up with the actual path of the machine, just to prevent any sort of shear force or any sort of discomfort on my actual joint of my knee. Keeping my knees lined up with the axis of rotation here, axis of rotation. And that's pretty much it. As I initiate every rep, driving my knee and my quads into this pad. So I'm not just thinking about pulling down like this. I'm actually using this pad to counter the weight. So I have something to push against as I pull my heels or my calves into my hamstrings. Same rules apply. We're going as close to failure as possible and just doing partials. We're going to do one more set here, and then we're going to move on to some lying hamstring curls. I like doing these. Seated is great because it allows you to train the hamstrings when they're in more of a lengthened state, and then doing them lying allows you to train the hamstrings when they're more in a shortened state. It all depends on your hip positioning. Okay, we're gonna move on. Look at that, easy peasy. We don't have to go too far. The same principles apply here than when I do seated. I'm just keeping my knees straight, again, making sure that my leg or lower leg is moving in the path of the machine, so I'm not having my toes kicked out. I'm actually not even thinking about my toes, so if they are slightly inward, it's whatever. I'm more so just focused on keeping my knees straight to the ground the entire time. I'm gripping the handles. I like this machine because it allows you, this is kind of set down a bit, so you can kind of still keep slight hip flexion, but you're keeping your chest up, allowing me to like crunch in, pull against these handles, engage my lats. This is going to help stabilize my hips through the entire movement. That's the biggest thing for legs in general, for any body part in general, is obviously stability is something I stress, but something for my leg development that has worked is keeping my hips stable the entire time through any exercise. If I can keep them stable, I'm able to generate as much force as possible on my leg muscles like my quads and my hamstrings or my glutes. We're aiming for about 3 sets, 3 working sets. And again, I'm not really I'm counting reps obviously to keep track, but I'm going for like 10, 12, maybe 15, trying to get close to failure and then doing some partials. Yeah. Oh. All right, last set, third and final. So again, pulling these handles, engaging my core, engaging my lats, driving my hips into that pad, and then pulling my calf to my hamstring. Oh shit. Okay, we're gonna move on. We're gonna move on to some Smith machine squats, focusing primarily on the glutes. So we'll go there. We'll do another set and I'm gonna run through the form with you guys, but one thing is, I'm not focused on weight today. I've just recently gotten over being sick. So my strength isn't all there, but the focus of this workout is to just execute as good a form as possible and keeping as much tension on the target muscle as possible. I'm not really focused on going too heavy. Not that I'd be going much heavier than this anyways, but again, I'm not feeling that strong, so we're just gonna focus on slowing down the reps, controlling every single rep in eccentric, and trying to generate as much force and tension on the target muscle. So in this case, I'm focused on my glutes. I'm gonna do another set, like I said, and then I'll explain my thought process for this movement. So out of breath. So I'm focused on primarily my glutes. So my thought process, unlike trying to target my quads, I'm actively trying to keep my knees behind my toes. So when I come down, I'm using a low bar position on my back, a little wider than shoulder width to work a bit more of my adductors as well. A little voice cracked. And then as I come down, I'm pushing those hips back, trying to create distance from this hip joint to the bar path. So I want my hip to move further away from that bar. That means I'm going to be loading primarily this joint. So my glutes coming down and minimizing the amount of knee flexion. So I'm not coming forward. Again, keeping those knees behind my toes the entire time, sitting back, and then coming down as far as I possibly can, getting that stretch, and then driving up with my hips. So I'm not initiating the movement like this. I'm keeping tension, driving up, and then squeezing at the top. Five more. Shitty part about being sick or getting over being sick is I find it just, I have no symptoms. It's just, I'm fatigued. I just don't have the strength and I'm just out of breath. But the goal again is to just do the best that we can, not focusing on the weight, focusing on the quality of every single rep. I care about the range the most. I want to make sure that I'm getting as deep as possible on every single movement. We're getting a full range because that indicates that I'm getting a full stretch. And to me, the stretch is extremely important. And a lot of the time people skip that part and they stay kind of hover in this mid-range where they're not going too deep, but they're also not going fully out of the hole either on any movement. They just kind of hover in this sort of middle contraction window. But I think if you focus on pushing past that mid, getting into that deep range, you'll notice a lot more results. And you'll also be a lot more strong, you'll be a lot stronger in those extreme ranges if you focus primarily on them. In turn, ideally, you prevent injury because you're allowing your body to adapt to those extremes, adapt to that range and that length of that muscle and that joint. So it's kind of my focus, regardless of being sick. But being sick just makes it that much harder and it makes me want to quit. All right, we got 2 more sets left for a total of roughly 5. And we're just gonna focus. I'm done talking. We're just gonna bang these next 2 sets out. Oh, shit. Last set. Fuck. Last one. Yeah, it's got a leg press. Okay, we're almost done the workout. I'm really tired. We're gonna do 2 sets as a burnout on leg press. We're gonna have our feet high up, focus on deep range, and we're only gonna do partial reps. So we're really just focused on lengthening those glutes, getting the deepest stretch possible, and staying within that lengthened partial range. Again, just going for as many as possible. Target reps is gonna be around 20, but ideally I wanna start failing around 12 to 15. And I'm gonna go slow. I'm not gonna be bouncing out of the bottom. We're only gonna do 2 sets of this. So we're gonna make it count. So again, we're keeping feet high up on this platform and just roughly shoulder width apart, nothing crazy. Give myself 1 more minute and then we're gonna do last set. Again, I'm really trying not to bounce out of the bottom. Trying to keep consistent reps, keeping that tension on the glutes as much as possible. Fuck. Okay. Oh man. 5 more. 5 more. Jesus. Oh man. You know, it's a good leg day when your ears are plugging. Oh my God. All right. We got one more exercise just to finish everything off. I'm pretty much done. I'm really fatigued, but told myself I was going to do it. I want to finish off with 1, maybe 2 sets of dumbbell or barbell RDLs, whatever is open or has more space. Again, same thing. We're just going to try to get a deep stretch and just squeeze out as much as possible in our glutes and hamstrings just to finish everything off. Fully stretch them out, and then that's it. Let's go over here. All right, so we're just gonna do one more set of the dumbbell RDLs. My focus on this, and I'll show you when I'm actually doing it, but the set you just saw, I'm keeping my feet roughly shoulder width apart as if I was gonna do a squat. Maybe a little more narrow, but again, whatever's comfortable, it's totally preference, there's no right or wrong. I'm thinking about not just bending, I'm pushing those hips as far back behind me as possible. In terms of my head positioning, I've actually found it helpful to look up. You don't have to look up. You can look straight ahead. You can look down, but the problem is sometimes, for some people, if they look down, they tend to round their back or arch too much. Round too much. So by looking up, it'll keep your chest up and it'll help you arch your lower back. Keeping that back a bit more neutral or even a bit extended, which is totally fine. Because the goal is to try to keep your back as rigid as possible and place all that tension into your hips and your glutes and your hamstrings. Lastly, with my feet, and one thing I'm thinking about is I'm actually pronating my feet inward like this. I'm letting all that pressure build up on the middle bottom of my foot as opposed to the outside edges or my heels. So I'm keeping all that pressure inside. By pronating in slightly, allows my hips to sort of kind of internally rotate, but it allows me actually to feel it more right in the meat of my hamstring, more of that tension, which is kind of what I want in this movement. So again, I'll run through it when I'm doing this last set. We're just focused on stretching everything out. I'm not trying to go too heavy again. I'm just trying to stretch and place as much tension, control that eccentric, and then obviously include some of those partial reps towards the end to fully burn out my glutes and hamstrings. All right, it's gonna be the last set. So again, we're keeping that chest up. I'm gonna be looking up as much as possible, keeping that back neutral or even extended a bit, not rounded. Locking my knees in position and then pronating my feet inward slightly to keep that pressure on the middle of my foot. Pushing those hips as far back as possible, keeping the weights close to my shins the entire time. So that's it. That's it. That's the end of the leg workout, the glutes and ham focus. We did our calves, started with hamstrings, burned them out. Got into squats, did 5 sets, glute focus. Finished off with some partial rep, lengthened partial reps, leg press, and then finished off just to stretch everything out with a somewhat of a lighter RDL. But again, we're focused on creating as much stability in our hips as possible when we're training our legs. That's going to allow us to generate as much force on the target muscles, whether that be our quads, our glutes, our calves, or our hamstrings. So I just want you to think about that and be conscious about that when you're lifting. Don't just go from A to B. Focus on creating as much stability as possible in the movement. If you learned something, that's all I'm happy about. Until next time, we'll see you probably on an upper body day. So take it easy.